Hello and welcome to the History Crew channel. Please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel as you will receive notification on important updates in the future. This video serves as part 5, with regards to topic 5 of your syllabus. As we have discussed in part 4, the country was in chaos and on the verge of civil war in 1992. However, due to international pressure, both Mandela and de Klerk were being pushed to reopen negotiations. Compromise and good leadership was shown by other leaders, when two men, Cyril Ramaphosa of the ANC and Rolf Meyer of the NP, held secret talks which also helped bring the leaders of their respective parties closer together too. These secret negotiations also led to the signing of the Record of Understanding in September 1992. This contained the agreement for a joint coalition government to be formed, and other important compromises as well. A major breakthrough was reached when another leader, Joe Slovo of the South African Communist Party, proposed that a government of national unity would rule until the year 2000 and that all white government employees' jobs would be guaranteed for the first 10 years. This clause in the agreement became known as the Sunset Clause. This was a significant piece of legislation because it helped to allay white fears in the country. Many whites were afraid of black revenge, and of losing everything they had, when the blacks took over. This was also an important compromise from the ANC, who actually had no experience in government, but were now willing to work with their former enemies, as part of the new government in the future. However, other parties such as the Conservative Party, IFP and the leaders of Ciskei plus Bothatsatswana were not even included in these talks. Ironically, it brought them together and they formed their own alliance known as the Concerned South African Group. You must take note that whilst progress was being made between the ANC and the National Party through these secret talks, this situation would result in violence and resistance to the negotiations by those who felt that they were being excluded. Now, after the secret talks were concluded, negotiations were open once again under a new directive called the Multi-Party Negotiating Process on 1 April 1993. However, the negotiation process was jeopardized yet again, when Chris Hani was assassinated on 10 April 1993. The country was on the verge of chaos and many black South Africans were calling for war. There was many acts of violence and bloodshed after Hani's assassination. The dire situation was averted, when de Klerk asked Mandela to address the nation. Mandela was rushed to the SABC studios, where he pleaded with the nation to stop the violence. He also informed the nation that it was with the help of a white Afrikaner woman that the assassin was caught. Chris Hani's death also created a sense of urgency at the multi-party negotiating process, and most of the members agreed that the negotiation process must be sped up. A date for the elections was decided on, which was from 27th to the 29th of April 1994. The setting of this date was important, because it gave many people hope and belief in the negotiations process. Once again though, the fragile peace and negotiations was threatened by more ongoing violence between 1993 to 1994. A shocking incident of violence occurred when members of the Pan-African Congress's armed wing attacked and killed patrons at Heidelberg Tavern in Cape Town, and later in that same year of 1993, they also attacked and killed worshippers who were praying at the St. James Church. They carried out these attacks in order to stall the negotiation process, because they were not in favor of the multi-party negotiating forum. The Pan-African Congress and their army also essentially believed that all white people were responsible for apartheid and were regarded as soft targets. Do not forget though, that the Pan-African Congress was not included in the secret talks between the ANC and NP during 1992, and this may have angered them. Another example of resistance against the multi-party talks occurred in July 1993, when members of the right-wing group AWB literally smashed into the World Trade Center in order to stop the multi-party negotiating process. They demanded that white Afrikaners be given their own independent folkstaat. They took over the World Trade Center for a few hours, spray-painted the walls with their slogans and agreed to leave after they handed in their petition, because they felt that the rights of the Afrikaners was being ignored. More violence that threatened to end the talks continued into the following year, and in March 1994, AWB members tried to invade the homeland of Bothatsatswana. By this time, the people were unhappy with their leader who was refusing them permission to take part in the elections. The people of Bothatsatswana began to turn against their leader, and the AWB then pretended to come to his aid, but used it instead to invade and take over. Many armed AWB supporters loaded up their cars and vans, and drove to Bothatsatswana. During this invasion, the soldiers of Bothatsatswana turned against Mungapir, who had to flee. The soldiers then fought back and defeated the AWB. After defeating the AWB, most of the police officers and soldiers then joined the ANC in the streets in celebration. This essentially ended the independence of the homeland of Bophuthatswana and reintegrated the lands as part of South Africa once again. Later in March 1994 as well, some members of Ciskei government rebelled against their leader too, and asked the South African government for assistance. UPA was then replaced, and this too brought the homelands of Ciskei back into South Africa once more. However, there was still incredible tension between the ANC and the IFP. The leader of the IFP was still resisting the negotiating process and was afraid of losing power, and also concerned that the Zulu kingdom would not be recognized. On the 28th of March 1994, armed members of the IFP marched to the ANC headquarters at the Shell House building in Johannesburg. There was a clash outside the building and many people were killed or wounded. Mandela then realized that future negotiations must also include the IFP in order to be successful. In 1994, before the April elections, two major role players were still refusing to participate in the elections. These were the Conservative Party and IFP. The Afrikaners were then split, and many Afrikaners left the Conservative Party and followed, however, their new leader Constant Viljoen. They formed a new party which was called the Freedom Front. As their leader, Constant Viljoen was not as stoic, and he then agreed to participate in the elections. This was an important step in the right direction, because having the Afrikaners participate in the elections would be crucial to ensuring that the elections would be a proper democratic process. The IFP remained firm in its refusal though, and there were many clashes between ANC and IFP members. The IFP even threatened to break away from South Africa completely. A compromise agreement was eventually reached by Mandela, de Klerk and Buthelezi. It was agreed that the Kingdom of KwaZulu would be recognized and the status of the Zulu monarch be protected. The IFP then finally agreed to participate in the elections as well. By this time there was already an interim constitution in place, and the ballot papers were already printed without the IFP logo. On the eve of elections, special stickers with the IFP logo had to be printed and then stuck on every single ballot paper. This had to be done by hand, for every ballot paper in the country, and was completed just hours before the elections could take place. And thus, after a chaotic period of 4 years, the day of elections finally dawned on South Africa. Many people did not believe that this day would ever come. Millions of South Africans stood for the first time in the same lines, which were kilometers long. Many had never voted before and woke up very early in the morning to going to the voting stations. It was mostly a wonderful day, with people from different races talking, laughing and sharing food. The number of people who turned out for voting was so overwhelming that many voting stations began to run out of ballot papers. Very late that night, many voters were then asked to return the next day, and thus South Africa's first democratic election continued the next day, on the 28th of April 1994. This day would not have been possible when it all began in 1990, due to the many challenges, but the intense negotiations, compromise and good leadership eventually won. South Africa proudly held its first democratic elections in 1994, and Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as the first democratically elected black president of South Africa. In the spirit of compromise, Mandela then appointed 2 deputy presidents. They were Thabo Mbeki and F.W. de Klerk. The coming of democracy in South Africa was not an easy, and the road itself was filled with obstacles and challenges. These challenges were overcome through intense negotiations and compromises, as well as the strong will of some leaders, who were totally determined to ensure that South Africa did not descend into chaos and civil war. South Africa's story was indeed a story of miracles, hope and perseverance. We must never forget that many people died before they could even see the birth of a democratic South Africa. We must not be selfish or arrogant about their ultimate sacrifice, but should honor their legacy by continuing to love this country, believe in it and help build it into a true rainbow nation. In conclusion, we will now complete a quick recap of some key aspects. Firstly, there were secret talks between Rolf Meyer and Cyril Ramaphosa. This led to the signing of the Record of Understanding and important compromises between the ANC and NP. Thirdly, Joe Slovo made some very important suggestions which helped them come to a compromise agreement and opened the way for negotiations to begin once more. This became known as the Sunset Clause. On the 1st of April 1993, the multi-party negotiating process began. However, on the 10th of April 1993, Chris Hani was assassinated, and this threatened to end the negotiations once again. During 1993, there were more incidents of violence such as the Heidelberg Tavern attack and St. James Church massacre carried out by the PAC, which were a threat to the peace process. In July 1993, the AWB storms the World Trade Center, in order to stall the negotiations as well. In March of 1994, the AWB failed in their invasion of Bophuthatswana. In the same month of March 1994, violent clashes broke out on the streets of Johannesburg between ANC and IFP supporters. This became known as the Shell House Massacre. The Freedom Front, which represented many Afrikaners, then agreed to participate in the elections of 1994. The IFP eventually agrees to participate in the elections after a compromise agreement was reached between Buthelezi, Mandela and de Klerk. On 27 April 1994, South Africa's first democratic elections were held. And lastly, Nelson Mandela became South Africa's first democratically elected president, and democracy was achieved. Thank you for watching this video, and please remember to subscribe to the History Crew channel.
Hola, hola ladies and cheetahs. I go by the name of Jules, former history student, filmmaker and musician by profession. This is a message for the History Crew. Guys, use the time that you guys have now. Use it wisely. You'll never ever 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 get this time back. Use it wisely. Study hard. I know it's boring. I was once a student myself, trust me. Anyway guys, take care of yourselves. Study hard. God bless. Enjoy the rest of the year.